Rural Vermont, 1867. While his neighbors filled shiny copper warming pans with glowing embers and slipped expensive hot water bottles under their quilts, one granite quarry hand was placing what looked like a chunk of farmyard rock at the foot of his rope bed. They called it primitive. They called him a fool. Who heats their bed with a stone when modern copper pans and porcelain bottles existed? But this wasn't just any rock. It was a 10 by 10 by 1.5 inch slab of soapstone, heated on his kitchen stove to 170 degrees, wrapped in flannel, and positioned where his feet would rest through the night. His neighbors' ember pans cooled fast, required dangerous midnight relights, and left ash in the bedding. Their hot water bottles lost heat by 1 in the morning, leaving feet numb by dawn. Then January's hard freeze settled over Windham County. Temperatures in unheated loft bedrooms dropped to the 30s. By 3 in the morning, neighbors' feet were registering 34 to 36 degrees on the thermometer. But that quarry hand's wrapped stone, it kept his foot of bed zone at 54 to 58 degrees until nearly 5 in the morning, a 20-degree advantage that meant the difference between shivering sleep and warm rest. What did he understand about heat storage and thermal mass that everyone else dismissed as backwoods ignorance? And how did his primitive bedrock prove superior to every modern heating method his neighbors trusted? If you value stories of practical wisdom that stood the test of time, make sure to subscribe. We've got more documented accounts worth remembering. The spirit thermometer hanging from a bent nail in the 10 by 12-foot loft bedroom read 36 degrees Fahrenheit when the quarry hand climbed the ladder that January night in 1867. Outside, wind cut across the Vermont hills with the kind of bite that made men hurry their evening chores and bank their fires early. The timber farmhouse creaked as temperatures dropped, and frost began forming on the inside corners of the single-pane windows. Down in the kitchen, the cast-iron range still held heat from the evening meal, its surface warm enough to make water droplets dance and hiss. While his wife finished the washing up below, the quarry hand carried his peculiar bed warmer up the narrow stairs, a slab of gray-green soapstone measuring 10 inches by 10 inches by 1.5 inches thick, weighing nearly 7 pounds. The stone had spent the last hour resting on the range top while supper cooked, absorbing heat the way only soapstone could. He had learned this property during his seasons at the Windham County Quarry, where offcuts of the dense mineral lay scattered around the cutting sheds, and later at the blacksmith's bench, where soapstone was prized for lining fireboxes because it could take tremendous heat without cracking. The stone was hot to the touch, roughly 170 degrees by his estimation, but not dangerously so. He wrapped it carefully in 2 layers of flannel, creating a barrier thick enough to prevent scorching while allowing the heat to radiate slowly through the fabric. The flannel layers measured approximately 3 to 4 millimeters total thickness, enough to protect bedding while maintaining thermal contact. He had fashioned a simple wooden cradle from pine scraps, sized to hold the wrapped stone securely and allow him to slide it into position at the foot of the rope bed without disturbing the feather tick or risking burns to the linen sheets. The bed itself was typical frontier construction, a frame of hewn timber with rope strung in a grid pattern to support the mattress. The feather tick, stuffed with down from the farmyard geese, provided insulation above, but the foot of the bed remained the coldest zone, where a man's feet would spend the longest, darkest hours fighting off the chill that crept up through floorboards and down from the unheated rafters. He positioned the wrapped stone at the foot of the bed and noted the time on his pocket watch, 9:20 in the evening. Within 5 minutes, the spirit thermometer at the foot of the bed began climbing from its 36-degree reading. By 9:30, it registered 52 degrees. By 9:45, it held steady at 54 to 56 degrees, a remarkable 18 to 20 degree increase in the microclimate where his feet would rest through the night. The kitchen below maintained a temperature of 58 to 62 degrees, warmed by the residual heat from the range and the day's cooking. But the loft, with its low-sloped ceiling following the roofline and minimal insulation, typically dropped to match the outdoor temperature within hours of sunset. On this January night, the loft air hovered between 38 and 42 degrees, making the localized warming at the bed foot all the more significant. According to period documentation from similar Vermont farmhouses, most settlers relied on copper warming pans filled with glowing embers from the hearth. These polished pans looked modern and respectable, Copper was expensive, and owning such implements marked a family as prosperous enough to afford proper household gear. The pans were designed to be filled with live coals, slid between the sheets for 10 or 15 minutes to warm the bedding, then removed before sleep to prevent fires and fumes. Others favored tin foot stoves filled with charcoal, portable devices that could be carried to church or loaded into sleighs for winter travel. Hot water bottles, ceramic or tin vessels filled with boiling water, represented another common approach, quick to heat and seemingly practical for families with access to large kettles and reliable stoves. But the quarry hand had observed problems with all these methods during his years working around heat and stone. Copper, despite its attractive appearance, had poor heat retention properties. It conducted heat quickly, which made copper pans heat up fast, but this same property meant they cooled just as rapidly once removed from the heat source. The specific heat capacity of copper measured only about 0.38 kilojoules per kilogram per degree Kelvin, meaning it could store relatively little heat per pound of material. Soapstone, by contrast, had a specific heat capacity of approximately 0.85 kilojoules per kilogram per degree Kelvin, more than double that of copper. A 7-pound slab of heated soapstone could store and release significantly more thermal energy than an equivalent weight of copper. Moreover, soapstone's low thermal diffusivity meant it gave up its stored heat slowly and evenly, rather than in a quick burst followed by rapid cooling. The quarry hand had also witnessed the dangers of ember-based warming methods. At the blacksmith shop, he had seen apprentices scorch leather aprons with carelessly handled coal. In neighboring households, he had heard accounts of singed bedding, minor burns from shifting hot metal, and morning headaches that veterans attributed to carbon monoxide from inadequately ventilated charcoal. The previous winter, a family 2 farms over had awakened to find scorch marks on their straw tick where a copper pan had been left too long under the quilts. His soapstone method eliminated these risks entirely. The stone produced no flames, generated no toxic gases, and posed no fire hazard once wrapped and positioned. It was in essence a thermal battery, a dense material that absorbed heat energy and released it gradually over many hours. The quarry had taught him that soapstone could withstand repeated heating and cooling cycles without cracking or degrading, making it ideal for applications requiring sustained, controlled heat release. As he settled into bed that January night, the wrapped stone at his feet maintaining its 54-degree warmth, the quarry hand knew his neighbors considered his method backward. They preferred the immediate satisfaction of hot copper and the social respectability of store-bought equipment. But he also knew that by midnight, when their ember pans had long since cooled and their hot water bottles had given up their heat, his feet would still rest in a pocket of warmth that would last until nearly dawn. The thermometer at the foot of his bed would prove this point through the long hours ahead, holding above 50 degrees past midnight, while the loft air continued its steady drop toward the outdoor temperature of 20 below zero. Hiram Cobb, the deacon and shopkeeper, kept his general store stocked with the finest warming implements available to Vermont households in the 1860s. His copper warming pans, imported from Connecticut manufactories, gleamed with the kind of polish that spoke of quality craftsmanship and modern sensibility. The pans measured roughly 12 inches in diameter with turned wooden handles designed to hold a bed of glowing coals that could be slid between cold sheets to chase away the winter chill. Tin foot stoves, punched with decorative holes for ventilation, sat lined up on his shelves alongside bags of charcoal and bundles of kindling sized specifically for bedroom heating. These implements represented the accepted technology of the era. Church pew boxes throughout New England were warmed by similar devices, small metal containers filled with hot coals that parishioners could rest their feet against during long Sunday services. Sleigh travel in winter months depended on portable foot warmers that could be loaded with charcoal and tucked under lap robes for hours-long journeys across frozen landscapes. The social proof was overwhelming. If respectable families used copper and tin for warming, then copper and tin must represent the proper approach to the problem. Hot water bottles offered another modern solution, particularly appealing to households with reliable access to boiling water. Ceramic vessels glazed in white or blue, or tin bottles with tight-fitting cork stoppers, could be filled from the kettle and wrapped in wool or flannel for safe handling. The method seemed logical, water held heat well, The containers were reusable, and the risk of fire was minimal compared to ember-based approaches. Yet the quarry hand understood something about heat storage that the conventional methods overlooked. During his seasons cutting stone and working around blacksmith forges, he had observed how different materials responded to heating and cooling. Copper conducted heat with remarkable efficiency. A copper pan placed on a hot stove would warm to the touch within seconds. This same property, however, meant that copper released its heat just as quickly once removed from the source. The specific heat capacity of copper, its ability to store thermal energy per unit mass, measured only about 0.38 kilojoules per kilogram per degree Kelvin according to engineering references of the period. Soapstone, the gray-green mineral he quarried from the Vermont hillsides, possessed dramatically different thermal properties. With a specific heat capacity of approximately 0.79 to 0.86 kilojoules per kilogram per degree Kelvin, soapstone could store more than twice as much heat energy per pound as copper. A 7-pound slab of soapstone heated to 170 degrees contained significantly more usable thermal energy than an equivalent weight of heated copper, and it released that energy slowly and steadily rather than in a rapid burst. The density of soapstone, approximately 2.7 to 2.9 grams per cubic centimeter, meant that even a modestly sized slab packed substantial thermal mass into a manageable package. The quarry hand's 10 by 10 by 1.5 inch stone weighed nearly 7 pounds, creating a thermal battery capable of warming the bedfoot zone for hours without requiring attention or refueling. His heating method had evolved through practical experience rather than theoretical knowledge. Each evening, while his wife prepared supper on the cast iron range, he positioned his soapstone slab on the flat surface beside the cooking pots. The residual heat from meal preparation, temperatures ranging from 150 to 180 degrees Fahrenheit, soaked into the dense stone over the course of 45 to 60 minutes. This piggyback approach to heating required no additional fuel, no special preparation, and no disruption to the household routine. The wrapping technique had developed through trial and error. A single layer of flannel allowed too much heat to escape too quickly, while excessive wrapping blocked useful radiation entirely. 2 layers of flannel, totaling approximately 3 to 4 millimeters thickness, created the optimal balance, enough insulation to prevent fabric damage while maintaining thermal contact between the stone and the surrounding air. The wooden cradle, fashioned from pine scraps, allowed safe positioning of the hot stone without risk of scorching the rope bed frame or linen sheets. Meanwhile, Hiram Cobb's copper warming pans required a different approach entirely. Coals from the evening fire had to be selected carefully, pieces large enough to maintain heat, but small enough to avoid creating dangerous hot spots in the pan. The filled pan would be slid between the sheets and moved systematically across the bed surface, warming the fabric and feather tick before being removed to prevent ignition. The entire process demanded attention and care, and even then, the warmed bedding began cooling immediately upon removal of the pan. Hot water bottles presented their own limitations. Water, despite its reputation as a good heat reservoir, actually lost temperature more rapidly than soapstone when contained in thin-walled vessels. A 1-quart ceramic bottle filled with water at 160 degrees would drop below 110 degrees within 2 hours, and the surrounding air temperature would continue pulling heat from the container throughout the night. Additionally, condensation often formed on the outside of water vessels, creating unwelcome moisture in bedding during sub-freezing weather. The social dynamics of heating methods created pressure beyond mere effectiveness. Copper warming pans represented investment and status. They were expensive, attractive, and associated with prosperous households. Using a chunk of quarry waste as a bed warmer appeared primitive by comparison, regardless of its thermal performance. Neighbors who visited the quarry hand's household noted his unconventional approach with the kind of polite disapproval reserved for practices that worked but seemed inappropriate to refined sensibilities. Jonas Peck, the itinerant stove mason who traveled throughout Vermont installing heating systems, understood the thermals, principles behind different warming methods. His work with masonry heaters and soapstone stove surrounds had taught him that thermal mass, the ability of materials to absorb, store, and slowly release heat energy, determined the effectiveness of any heating strategy. Copper provided quick heat transfer but minimal heat storage. Soapstone provided moderate heat transfer but exceptional heat storage, making it ideal for applications requiring sustained warming over many hours. The quarry hands method represented a practical application of these principles, developed through direct experience with materials rather than theoretical study. His heated soapstone slab, wrapped in flannel and positioned at the bed foot, created a localized heating system that would maintain comfortable temperatures through the coldest hours of the night without requiring midnight attention, fuel replenishment, or safety monitoring. The true test of competing methods would come during the approaching cold snap, when sub-zero temperatures would challenge every household's heating strategies and reveal which approaches provided genuine thermal advantage versus mere social acceptability. Jonas Peck arrived at the Quarry Hands farmhouse on a bitter February morning when the mercury and outdoor thermometers had dropped to 15 degrees below zero and showed no signs of climbing. As an itinerant stove mason who installed heating systems across Vermont and New Hampshire, Peck carried in his mind a working knowledge of thermal dynamics that most settlers learned only through costly trial and error. He had come to examine a troublesome chimney draft, but found himself drawn into a conversation about the unusual bed warming method that had kept the household comfortable through the recent cold snap. The quarry hand led Peck to the kitchen, where the soapstone slab rested on a wooden shelf beside the cast iron range. Peck hefted the stone, noting its weight and density, then ran his fingers along its smooth surfaces. The gray-green mineral showed the characteristic feel of steatite, dense, fine-grained, and remarkably uniform in composition. During his years setting masonry heaters and fitting soapstone stove surrounds, Peck had learned to recognize quality stone by touch and appearance. Specific heat capacity, Peck said, using the technical term that few settlers would recognize. That stone can hold near twice the heat energy per pound as any metal warming pan. He pulled a piece of slate from his tool sack and began scratching numbers with a chalk stub, working out the arithmetic that explained why the quarry hands method succeeded where conventional approaches failed. A 7-pound slab of soapstone heated to 170 degrees and cooling to 120 degrees over the course of several hours would release approximately 80 to 90 kilojoules of thermal energy, enough to warm several pounds of bedding and maintain a comfortable microclimate around a person's feet and lower legs throughout the night. The calculation assumed soapstone's specific heat capacity of roughly 0.85 kilojoules per kilogram per degree Kelvin, a figure Peck had learned from German stove makers who prized the mineral for its thermal properties. Thermal diffusivity, Peck continued, introducing another concept that governed heat transfer. Soapstone's low thermal diffusivity, approximately 0.8 to 1.1 square millimeters per second, meant the stone gave up its stored heat slowly and evenly, rather than in a rapid burst. This property explained why the quarry hands wrapped stone could maintain useful temperatures for 5 or 6 hours, while copper warming pans cooled to room temperature within an hour of removal from the heat source. The stovemason had seen these principles demonstrated repeatedly in his professional work. Masonry heaters built with soapstone cores could warm a room for 12 to 18 hours after a single firing, while iron stoves required constant feeding to maintain heat output. The same thermal mass that made soapstone valuable for heating systems made it superior for personal warming applications. Peck examined the flannel wrapping system, noting how the fabric layers created controlled insulation without blocking useful heat radiation. "Too much wrapping and you trap the heat inside," he explained. "Too little and it escapes faster than you can use it. 2 layers of flannel gives you maybe 3 to 4 millimeters total, just right for overnight warming without scorching the bedding." The wooden cradle represented another thoughtful detail. Fashioned from pine scraps and sized to hold the wrapped stone securely, it prevented direct contact between the hot stone and combustible materials while allowing easy positioning at the bed foot. The cradle's open construction permitted air circulation around the wrapped stone, enabling convective heat transfer while maintaining safety. Outside, the temperature continued dropping as the sun disappeared behind the western hills. Peck had planned to return to his lodgings in the village, but the quarry hand invited him to observe the evening heating routine and witness the stone's performance during what promised to be the coldest night of the winter. According to the weather signs, the particular quality of the wind, the behavior of chimney smoke, and the way ice formed on window panes, temperatures would likely reach 20 below zero before dawn. As the household prepared for the night, Peck positioned a spirit thermometer at various locations in the loft bedroom, taking baseline measurements that would allow comparison with previous nights. The loft air temperature measured 34 degrees at 8 in the evening, while the foot of bed zone registered 32 degrees, cold enough to make sleep uncomfortable and potentially dangerous for anyone with compromised circulation. The quarry hand began his heating routine at 8:30, placing the soapstone slab on the range top beside the pot of beans his wife had prepared for the next day's meals. The stone absorbed heat steadily as the range maintained cooking temperature, reaching approximately 170 degrees after 50 minutes of exposure to the cast iron surface. Peck observed the wrapping process with professional interest, noting how the quarry hand tested the stone's temperature with a brief touch before proceeding with the flannel layers. The wrapping technique had clearly been refined through experience. The flannel was positioned to create even coverage without gaps, then secured with the kind of economical movements that spoke of nightly repetition. At 9:45, the wrapped stone was positioned in its wooden cradle at the bed foot. Peck recorded the immediate temperature response, watching the spirit thermometer climb from 32 degrees to 48 degrees within 3 minutes, then to 54 degrees by 10 o'clock. The localized warming effect created a thermal zone roughly 2 feet in diameter, where the stone's radiant heat overcame the general chill of the unheated loft. "The mathematics are simple enough," Peck told the quarry hand as they prepared for sleep. "Your stone weighs about 3 1/10 kilograms. Dropping 30 degrees over 6 hours, it releases near 90 kilojoules of energy. That's enough thermal content to warm the bedfoot zone 20 degrees above ambient temperature until near dawn." The stovemason's professional experience had taught him to recognize thermal systems that worked efficiently versus those that merely appeared impressive. Copper warming pans provided immediate heat but lacked staying power. Hot water bottles offered convenience but insufficient thermal capacity. Soapstone bed warmers combined substantial heat storage with safe, sustained release, the same principles that made soapstone valuable for heating entire houses. As the night deepened and outdoor temperatures plummeted toward 20 below zero, Peck understood why the quarry hand's neighbors would soon abandon their conventional warming methods in favor of heated stone. The thermal advantage was simply too significant to ignore, regardless of social prejudices about primitive versus modern approaches. The coming test would demonstrate conclusively whether materials science or social convention provided better protection against the brutal cold of a Vermont winter night. Elias Hart, the church sexton and school board clerk, arrived at the quarry hand's farmhouse on the second night of the cold snap, carrying his spirit thermometer and a leather-bound ledger, where he recorded temperatures for the church building and schoolhouse during harsh weather. Hart had developed the habit of systematic measurement during his years maintaining public buildings, understanding that accurate records could mean the difference between adequate heating and frozen pipes. Deacon Hiram Cobb had challenged the quarry hand's claims about his heated stone, insisting that no chunk of rock could outperform proper copper warming equipment, and Hart had agreed to serve as impartial witness to a 3-night comparison. The first trial involved Cobb's finest copper warming pan, a 12-inch diameter vessel with turned wooden handles that represented the modern standard for bedroom heating. At 9 o'clock, Cobb filled the pan with carefully selected coals from his kitchen hearth, pieces large enough to maintain heat, but small enough to avoid dangerous hot spots. The filled pan was slid between the sheets and moved systematically across the bed surface for 20 minutes, warming the feather tick and linen before being removed to prevent ignition. Hart positioned his thermometer at the foot of the bed immediately after the copper pan's removal, recording an initial reading of 48 degrees Fahrenheit. The warmed bedding felt comfortable to the touch, and Cobb expressed confidence that his method would maintain adequate temperatures through the night. However, by midnight, Hart's thermometer showed the foot-of-bed temperature had dropped to 36 degrees. By 1:30 in the morning, it registered 34 degrees, barely above the general loft air temperature. The copper pan's rapid heat loss became evident around 2 o'clock, when Cobb was forced to rekindle coals for a second warming. This midnight reheating required him to dress, descend to the kitchen, select fresh coals, and repeat the bed warming process. Hart noted the additional fuel consumption, approximately 1/4 armload of split wood to revive the kitchen fire, and recorded a safety incident when Cobb accidentally scorched a sheet edge while maneuvering the hot pan in dim candlelight. The second trial employed a 1-quart ceramic hot water bottle, glazed in blue and fitted with a tight cork stopper. This method appealed to households with reliable access to boiling water and represented a seemingly safer alternative to ember-based warming. At 9:15, the bottle was filled with water heated to approximately 160 degrees and wrapped in wool for safe handling. Hart's initial temperature reading at the bedfoot showed 50 degrees, slightly warmer than the copper pan's immediate effect. However, by 12:40 in the morning, the thermometer registered only 39 degrees as the contained water continued losing heat to the surrounding air. The ceramic vessel, despite its insulation wrapping, could not maintain useful temperatures beyond the first few hours of the night. An additional problem emerged around 1 o'clock when Hart noticed condensation forming on the bottle's exterior surface. The moisture created a damp spot in the bedding, an unwelcome development when the loft air temperature hovered near freezing. By morning, the bottle contained lukewarm water, and the surrounding bedding showed signs of moisture that would require airing before the next night's use. The third trial featured the quarry hand soapstone method, beginning with his standard evening routine. The 10 by 10 by 1.5 inch slab was positioned on the range top at 8:30, absorbing heat while the household completed its evening tasks. By 9:30, the stone had reached approximately 170 degrees, hot to the touch but not dangerously so. The quarry hand wrapped the heated stone in 2 layers of flannel, creating the controlled insulation that prevented fabric damage while maintaining thermal contact. Hart observed the wrapping technique with attention to detail, noting how the flannel was positioned to eliminate gaps while avoiding excessive thickness that might block useful heat radiation. At 9:45, the wrapped stone was placed in its wooden cradle at the bedfoot. Hart's thermometer showed an immediate response, climbing from 36 degrees to 54 degrees within 5 minutes. By 10:15, the reading had stabilized at 56 to 58 degrees, creating a localized warm zone that extended roughly 2 feet in diameter from the stone's position. The soapstone's thermal performance continued through the night's coldest hours. Hart's midnight reading showed 52 degrees at the bedfoot, a full 16 degrees warmer than the copper pan trial, and 13 degrees above the water bottle results. At 1:30 in the morning, when both conventional methods had failed, the soapstone zone maintained 50 degrees. The stone's advantage became most pronounced during the pre-dawn hours, when outdoor temperatures reached 22 below zero and the loft air dropped to 30 degrees. Hart's 3:30 reading showed 49 degrees at the bedfoot, while his 5 o'clock measurement registered 47 degrees, still substantially above the ambient air temperature and warm enough to ensure comfortable sleep. Over the course of the 3-night trial, Hart calculated the soapstone method's average advantage at 10 to 14 degrees above the hot water bottle approach and 18 to 22 degrees above nights with no warming aid whatsoever. The stone required no midnight attention, produced no safety hazards, and consumed no additional fuel beyond the piggyback heating that occurred during normal cooking routines. Hart's systematic measurements revealed the fuel and labor costs associated with different warming methods. The copper pan approach required an average of 1 to 2 ember reloadings per night, plus the occasional 2 o'clock rekindling that consumed extra firewood and disrupted sleep. Ash cleanup the following morning added another task to the household routine. The soapstone method eliminated these maintenance requirements entirely. The stone was heated once each evening during supper preparation, requiring 0 minutes of additional stove time since it absorbed heat that would otherwise dissipate unused. No midnight tending was necessary, no ash required cleanup, and no safety monitoring was needed once the wrapped stone was positioned. Hart recorded material costs and availability in his ledger, noting that soapstone offcuts were commonly available from New England quarries and stove shops. The stones typically measured 8 to 12 inches in length and 1 to 2 inches in thickness, with weights ranging from 5 to 10 pounds depending on dimensions and density. Museum records from the period confirm that such stones were regularly sold for household heating applications, validating their widespread use despite social prejudices against primitive methods. The three-night comparison provided conclusive evidence that thermal mass trumped thermal conductivity for sustained bedroom warming, regardless of conventional preferences for copper's modern appearance over stone's rustic associations. Within a week of Hart's documented measurements, three neighboring households had quietly adopted the soapstone warming method. Martha Ellis, the farm wife caring for children and an elderly parent in a drafty timber house, became the first convert after witnessing the 20-degree advantage during the coldest night of the trial. She visited Silas O'Rourke's quarry operation and selected an 8 by 10-inch slab weighing approximately 6 pounds, choosing a piece with smooth edges that would not damage her flannel wrapping or bedding materials. Martha's initial trial produced immediate results. Her children, who had complained of cold feet and restless sleep during previous winter nights, slept soundly with the wrapped stone positioned at the foot of their shared bed. The stone maintained foot zone temperatures 15 to 18 degrees above ambient air temperature until nearly 5 in the morning, eliminating the need for midnight attention that had disrupted the household's sleep routine. Within 3 nights, she had standardized her heating process: 45 minutes on the range top during evening meal preparation, wrapped in 2 layers of flannel, positioned in a pine cradle that her husband fashioned from barn scraps. The Ellis household's adoption carried particular weight in the community because Martha managed the care of her 73-year-old father, whose circulation had deteriorated to the point where cold nights left him stiff and uncomfortable until well past dawn. The heated soapstone allowed the elderly man to sleep through the night without waking to numb feet and aching joints, an improvement that Martha credited with better overall health and mood during the harsh winter months. Dr. Rebecca Lane, the county physician who rode winter circuits throughout the region, lent medical authority to the stone method's safety advantages during a visit to treat Martha's father for a persistent cough. Dr. Lane had treated numerous cases of mild carbon monoxide poisoning linked to improperly ventilated coal pans, particularly in households where ember-filled warming devices were left under quilts for extended periods. She had also dressed burns caused by shifting hot metal pans and scorched bedding that had ignited when copper warming vessels were carelessly handled. The stone produces no combustion gases, Dr. Lane noted in her case records, and poses no ignition risk once properly wrapped and positioned. The method eliminates the primary hazards associated with bedroom heating while providing superior thermal performance. Her professional endorsement carried significant influence among families who had previously dismissed the technique as primitive or inappropriate for respectable households. Thomas Cobb, the deacon's son who apprenticed with Jonas Peck fitting stoves and masonry heaters, became an unexpected advocate for soapstone bed warming after observing the thermal principles during his training. His work installing heating systems had taught him to recognize thermal mass as the key factor in sustained warming applications, and he began recommending heated stone blocks to customers who complained of cold sleeping quarters. Thomas standardized the technique specifications based on his master's technical knowledge and field observations from multiple households. Slab dimensions should measure 8 to 12 inches in length and 1 to 2 inches in thickness, with weights ranging from 5 to 10 pounds, depending on the user's strength and heating capacity. Stones with smooth, dressed edges prevented fabric damage and allowed safer handling, while irregular or sharp-edged pieces created unnecessary wear on flannel wrappings. The heating protocol required 45 to 60 minutes on a cast iron range top or positioned inside an oven during evening cooking activities. Target temperature should reach 160 to 180 degrees, hot enough to store substantial thermal energy, but not so hot as to create handling dangers or fabric scorching. Stones heated beyond this range risked damaging the flannel wrapping or creating uncomfortable hot spots that could disturb sleep. Wrapping technique involved 2 layers of flannel totaling approximately 3 to 4 millimeters thickness, positioned to eliminate gaps while avoiding excessive insulation that would block useful heat radiation. The wrapped stone should be placed in a wooden cradle or thick towel arrangement that prevented direct contact with bed frames, rope supports, or linen sheets. Proper ventilation of the sleeping room remained important, as the stone added heat to the enclosed space and could create stuffiness if air circulation was inadequate. Morning procedures required allowing the stone to cool naturally on a hearth brick or wooden shelf, with strict prohibition against quenching with water due to thermal shock risks that could crack the soapstone. Stones that developed cracks or chips should be replaced immediately, as damaged pieces might break apart during them. Heating and create safety hazards. The technique spread through practical demonstration rather than formal instruction. Silas O'Rourke, the quarry foreman, reported steady demand for 8 to 12-inch soapstone offcuts from households throughout Windham County and neighboring areas. His workers began dressing the edges of suitable pieces and sorting them by size to meet the growing demand for bed warming stones. Museum collections from the period document this adoption pattern, with surviving soapstone bed warmers showing consistent dimensions and edge finishing that suggest standardized production methods. Many specimens include shallow grooves or handholds carved into the stone surfaces, indicating refinements developed through regular use. Some stones show evidence of clothware patterns on their surfaces, confirming the flannel wrapping technique described in contemporary accounts. Coal pans and ember-based warming devices remained in use for specialized applications, where soapstone was impractical, church pew boxes, sleigh travel, and situations requiring portable heat sources. However, for household bedroom warming, heated stone increasingly displaced conventional methods among families who prioritized thermal performance over social conventions. The quarry hand's approach had evolved from mockery to household standard through systematic demonstration of superior results. His understanding of thermal mass and heat storage, gained through practical experience with stone and metal in working environments, had provided the foundation for a warming method that outperformed fashionable alternatives by substantial margins. Winter after winter, as families throughout the region adopted variations of the heated stone technique, the method proved its worth through consistent performance during the coldest nights. The principle remained constant. Dense materials with high specific heat capacity could store and release thermal energy more effectively than lighter materials with superior heat conduction properties, regardless of their modern appearance or social acceptability. On the coldest nights, when conventional wisdom failed and fashionable warming methods left families shivering until dawn, the old technique that had looked foolish worked because it stored more heat per pound and released it slowly and steadily, which was all that winter had ever asked of any good idea.